The skies over the planet Erastis turned black without warning. Thick clouds boiled in from the east, swirling like a storm, but without rain. The soldiers of the Allied command stared up from the trenches, their rifles shaking in their hands. The air tasted of ash and something older, something that reminded the oldest among them of stories they were told never to believe. General Hardened tightened his grip on the rail. His silver armor reflected the first orange flash of fire in the sky. His men, elite troops from 6 different species, were already breaking ranks. Some dropped weapons, some prayed, some simply ran. None of it would matter now. The enemy had come in force. The Dravak Swarm, creatures made of living shadow and bone, moved like a plague across the surface. Their claws cut through tanks. Their acid breath melted barriers. They didn't speak, didn't show mercy, and they didn't die easily. Erastis had requested reinforcements 2 weeks ago. But no ships had come, no word from the High Council. Just silence. The last perimeter was cracking. Soldiers screamed through the coms, their cries turning into static. The western wall exploded in green flame. General Hardened stood firm even as his second-in-command collapsed behind him, face eaten away by a Dravak spit. Hardened didn't blink. He didn't flinch. But he whispered into his communicator, his voice low and bitter. "So this is how the galaxy forgets us." Then a sound tore through the clouds. Not thunder, not engines, something heavier. Like iron dragged across the bones of a god. A glowing shape descended from the sky-black steel, jagged wings, and blue plasma flames that carved open the heavens. It landed with such force the ground beneath the swarm cracked in a perfect circle. The creature that stepped out wasn't a ship's pilot. It was the weapon, 2 meters tall. Armor black as deep space, pulsing with red veins of energy. Its helmet hissed and split open, revealing a human face. Young, cold, eyes like burnt gold. The soldiers froze. Even the Dravak stopped moving. The air bent around the newcomer like gravity had changed. The human didn't speak. He raised one hand. From the sky, more shapes dropped. Dozens, then hundreds. Each one hit the ground like a meteor. Deathworlders, humans born on planets so violent, their bodies were more machine than flesh, more predator than prey. The Dravak turned and charged. They thought this was another easy slaughter. They were wrong. The first Deathworlder moved like a storm. His blade tore through 3 swarm creatures in a single swing. Another Deathworlder opened her chestplate, revealing a rotating cannon implanted directly into her ribcage. She mowed down a charging wave in seconds. A third leapt 40 feet, landed on a Dravak's back, and drove a plasma drill through its skull. They didn't fight for strategy. They fought to end the war. The soldiers in the trenches stared. They'd heard stories about Earth's people, that they were cursed, that they shouldn't be contacted, that they survived the worst planets by turning themselves into weapons. But none of the stories prepared them for this. General Hardened finally moved, climbing out of the trench and watching the slaughter unfold. Dravak bodies burned where they fell. Deathworlders barely bled. When one was torn in half, her upper body still kept firing. When another was surrounded, he laughed and triggered his chest to detonate, taking 15 enemies with him. They fought like they didn't care about death. Maybe they didn't. After 20 minutes, the battlefield was silent. The Dravak Swarm was gone, not retreating, not hiding. Gone. Burned, broken, crushed, or vaporized. The humans stood among the remains. Smoke clung to their shoulders like cloaks. None of them spoke until the first one, the leader, turned to Hardened. "We heard your distress call," he said, voice rough like sand. "So we came." Hardened nodded slowly, eyes wide. You're from Earth?" The Deathworlder's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "Not anymore." Then the ground rumbled again. Another Dravak signal. The swarm wasn't finished. Reinforcements were coming from beneath the surface. The battle was far from over, but Harvin wasn't afraid anymore. He looked at the Deathworlders, standing firm, already reloading, already preparing. And he whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Let them come." Asterisk smoke still hung in the air, curling around the shattered ground like wounded spirits. The silence after the battle felt strange, almost heavy. General Harvin stood at the edge of the ruined trench, his boots buried in ash. Around him, the survivors of his unit gathered, their armor scorched, faces smeared with fear and awe. No one spoke. All eyes were on the Deathworlders. They moved like shadows. Some picked through the remains of the Dravak, scanning corpses for unknown tech. Others stood motionless, weapons still humming with energy. The leader, the one with gold eyes, removed his helmet completely. His face looked young, but the way he moved was not. He had the eyes of someone who had seen too many wars. Harvin approached him slowly. "You knew they would come again," the Deathworlder nodded. "They always do. The Swarm sends scouts first. If resistance is weak, they flood the land. If resistance is strong, they tunnel." A rumble beneath the earth made the soldiers flinch. Several Deathworlders dropped to one knee, placing their palms on the ground. One of them, a tall woman with black braids and armored fingers, said calmly, "They're burrowing. South side, 3 minutes." Harvin blinked. "You can hear them?" The woman smirked. "No, I can feel them." Without waiting for orders, the Deathworlders moved. They split into units, fanning out in precise patterns. Each one took position. With discipline no one had taught them, they were born with it. The allied soldiers, confused and half-panicked, hesitated. Harvin turned toward them and shouted, "Follow their lead. Stay close, do not get in their way." 3 minutes passed. Then the ground erupted like thunder. Huge Dravak beasts burst through the soil, mouths wide, acid steaming from their jaws. But this time, they weren't met with fear, they were met with Deathworlders waiting. Explosives already placed under the soil, detonated in perfect sync. Dravak limbs flew into the air. One creature tried to rise, but a Deathworlder impaled it through the throat with a spear made of what looked like bone and steel. Another fired a wrist cannon that tracked moving targets, hitting 3 enemies with laser-guided bolts in under a second. The allied soldiers joined the fight. They were clumsy next to the humans, but they followed closely. A young Metran soldier slipped, almost falling into a Dravak's jaw. Before he hit the ground, a human caught him by the backplate and hurled him out of danger like he weighed nothing. Harvin was still watching, calculating. These humans weren't just strong, they were coordinated. They anticipated, and they never paused. There was no shouting, no orders, just silent understanding. As if they shared the same mind, or had seen this war too many times before. One of the Deathworlders took a direct hit. A jagged Dravak claw pierced her stomach. She didn't scream. Instead, she grabbed the limb, tore it off, and used it as a weapon. She limped to a clear spot, dropped to one knee, and started recharging her weapon with wires from her own arm. She was bleeding, but she didn't stop. Harvin approached the leader again. "You fought them before." The leader didn't look at him. He was tracking the battlefield with a clear visor now. "We fought them on Vara's Prime, on Gorgon's Rift, on Earth." That last word made Harvin pause. "Earth? I thought your world was quarantined. Forbidden to visit." The leader finally looked at him. "It was, until we broke free." In the distance, another tremor began. But this time, it wasn't the swarm. It was heavier, mechanical. The leader narrowed his eyes. "They've brought something bigger. A Titan." "What's a Titan?" Harvin asked. "A walking siege engine, biomechanoid, built to erase cities." Harvin swallowed hard. "We have nothing that can stand against that." The leader turned his head slightly. "We do." He raised his hand, and from the dropships beyond the ridge, 4 more Deathworlders emerged, massive, towering, their bodies covered in thick armor and reactor coils glowing with white light. They weren't just soldiers. They were weapons built for extinction-level combat. The ground trembled as they approached, each step echoing across the battlefield. The Allied troops could barely look at them. One of them whispered, "They're not even human anymore." Another said, "Maybe they never were." But Harvin wasn't afraid. For the first time in the entire war, he felt something else. It wasn't hope, it was certainty. These beings didn't come to survive. They came to end it. The leader walked ahead, voice low but sharp. "Hold the line. The Titan comes to erase this world. But today, it meets the Deathworlders." And every soldier, alien or not, readied their weapons. Beside them, the ground cracked open in the distance. Dust spiraled into the sky, forming a tall black cloud that blotted out the sun. The sound was unlike anything the soldiers had ever heard. It was not thunder. It was heavier, slower, mechanical, and alive. The Titan had arrived. Even the bravest among the Allied troops hesitated. It came crawling over the ridge like a mountain with legs. A massive fusion of living tissue and machine, covered in spiked armor, leaking steam and slime from its sides. Its head had no eyes, only a glowing mouth that pulsed with red energy. With each step, it crushed craters into the land. The Deathworlders didn't back away. Instead, they moved toward it, calm, ready. The four massive Deathworlders, twice the size of normal soldiers, formed a line, shoulder to shoulder. They didn't speak. Their bodies lit up with energy, plasma cores spinning across their armor like living reactors. The wind blew their cloaks behind them, but their feet did not move. General Harvin stood behind them, unable to believe what he was seeing. That thing is a weapon from another age. It's not meant to be defeated. It's meant to erase all trace of life. The Deathworlder leader, still standing calmly beside him, replied without looking. "That's why we were made." The Titan opened its mouth. A beam of red fire exploded from it, tearing across the ground and melting anything in its path. The Deathworlders split apart at the last second, the beam missing them by inches. Then they charged. The first giant Deathworlder leapt, rockets blasting from his legs. He slammed into the Titan's arm, slicing through it with a heated axe the size of a transport vehicle. The Titan roared, not in pain, but in reaction. It swung its remaining arm, hitting another Deathworlder and sending him flying into the cliffs. The third dropped beneath the Titan's legs and fired spikes upward into its underbelly. Sparks and blood burst from the creature's body, but it didn't fall. Instead, it dropped to all fours and charged forward, crushing three small bunkers and knocking aside debris like it was paper. From the ridge, the Allied troops opened fire. It was mostly useless, but they tried anyway. Harvin shouted orders, but his voice was drowned in the chaos. A few brave soldiers ran forward to drag wounded back. Others took cover and simply watched, trying to understand what kind of war this had become. Among the noise, a strange calm surrounded the Deathworlder leader. He was walking forward slowly, each step steady. He wasn't wearing the heavy armor of the Titan's layers. He had only his plasma blades, his dark coat, and the glow in his eyes. He activated a device on his wrist. A sharp hum filled the air. The Titan turned toward him. Somehow, it recognized him as a threat. The ground beneath the human melted from the heat of the monster's breath, but he didn't stop. He dodged left, slid under a falling piece of metal, and climbed the Titan's leg like a hunter climbing a tree. He moved fast. Too fast. The Titan tried to shake him off, but the human was already on its back, planting devices, slicing into power lines that ran through its armor. Each strike was precise, not wild, not emotional, controlled. As if he had done it before, the Titan stumbled. It opened its mouth again to release another beam, but before it could fire, One of the massive Deathworlders jumped and slammed his entire body into the creature's throat. A loud crack echoed. The light in the Titan's mouth flickered. The leader reached the top. He placed one last explosive and then launched himself off the back, free-falling as the sky turned orange from the charges going off. The Titan twisted, screamed, and dropped to one knee. The Deathworlders rushed it from every side. One pierced its chest with a drill. Another crushed its skull with a hammer powered by internal fusion. Finally, the monster stopped moving. Silence returned, but it was not peaceful. It was full of disbelief. The allied soldiers stared at the collapsed Titan. Their mouths hung open. Some dropped their weapons, a few wept. It was over. The battlefield was scattered with burning wreckage, torn limbs, and dark smoke, but the Titan had fallen. Harvin walked through the ash, stopping beside the Deathworlder leader, who now stood on a hill overlooking the ruins. "You've done the impossible." That was an extinction-class monster. No one has ever brought one down like this. The human glanced at him. Earth has, many times. The galaxy just never asked us how. Harvin felt the chill again, not from fear, but from realization. How many more of you are out there? The human didn't answer immediately. He looked up at the stars, eyes glowing faintly. Enough. The wind carried the smell of metal, ash and blood across the broken battlefield. Fires still burned in small craters. The Titan's body, half sunk into the earth, steamed like a volcano cooling down. Its glowing veins had faded to black. But the soldiers remained still, watching the Deathworlders in silence. Harvin stood at the edge of the wreckage, arms crossed, mind racing. He had seen war before, fought in dozens of campaigns. But nothing compared to this. Nothing had ever made him feel like a bystander in his own command. The Deathworlders didn't ask permission. They didn't wait for orders. They just fought and won. He turned to the human leader, who was kneeling near a wounded Deathworlder, helping him reconnect a neural cord inside his chest plate. The human moved carefully, but with confidence. His hands were stained with blood and oil, but he showed no fear or fatigue. Harvin cleared his throat. "You knew what that creature was. You fought them before, more than once." The human didn't look up. "Yes," Harvin frowned. "Then tell me, why didn't the High Council call you sooner?" The human finally stood. His golden eyes met Harvin. "They're the ones who tried to erase us." The words hit like a blow. Harvin blinked. Erase? Earth was quarantined. Isolated. The official record said your kind rejected peace. The human laughed, low and bitter. "Is that what they told you?" He motioned toward one of the younger soldiers. A Lorani, tall and blue-skinned, stood nearby listening. The human spoke loud enough for all to hear. "When Earth made first contact, we offered our help. Our technology, our experience. The galaxy looked at us and saw monsters, not because we attacked, but because we survived things no one else could." The Lorani stepped closer, curious. "You mean your home was violent?" The human nodded. "Earth is a death world. Everything on it fights to live. Even the air tries to kill you in some places. Our animals, our plants, even the bacteria, we evolved through pain, through constant challenge. And when the galaxy saw us, they feared what we'd become." Harvin spoke slowly, trying to understand. "So they cut you off, they did." "More than that," the human replied. "They sent fleets. They said it was for containment, but they attacked us, bombed our orbitals, tried to force us into genetic disarmament. When we refused, they turned their backs and labeled us dangerous." Silence fell over the group. The allied soldiers looked at one another. Some whispered. Others stared at the human like seeing him for the first time. Harvin clenched his jaw. "I never knew. I believed the reports. I thought your people were just unstable." The human looked around. "And yet, When your world started falling, when your best soldiers couldn't hold the line, who did you call? No one answered. The truth sat like a weight on their shoulders. The human stepped past Harvin, toward the communications tower. Still standing beyond the ridge, a few Deathworlders followed him. He activated the console, bypassing the encryption with a few taps. Then he opened a galactic-wide channel and broadcast a simple message. To the Allied systems, your reinforcements have arrived. But they are not what you expected. We are Deathworlders, and we are here to end the war you couldn't. The message sent, the human turned back toward the others. Now the real war begins. The swarm is only part of the threat. There are others, creatures you haven't even seen yet. And when they come, they won't ask who you are. They'll ask what you've survived. Harvin nodded slowly. And the only ones who'll have the answer are you. The human didn't smile. He only checked the horizon. More tremors were coming. Not as loud as the Titan, but faster. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Another wave of enemies was approaching, and this time, they would not hesitate. The soldiers who once feared the Deathworlders now followed them willingly. There were no speeches, no cheers. Just the sound of weapons locking into place and armor tightening. They had learned that the Deathworlders didn't speak much before battle. They simply acted. As the second swarm rose over the Black Hills, Harvin stood side by side with the human leader. This time, he said quietly, we fight with you. The human nodded once, then stay close. And remember, on Earth, we never run. The hills turned black with movement. From every ridge and crater, creatures spilled forward like a living tide. The swarm had returned, and this time, it came in force. Thousands of Dravak, their bodies glowing with faint green veins, ran across the broken land with razor limbs and screeching mouths. Their eyes burned with one purpose: consume everything in their path. Vaughn stood behind the new line formed near the edge of the fallen Titan. His command unit was mixed now. Humans and aliens stood shoulder to shoulder. Where once there had been fear, now there was something else. A strange trust had settled into their bones. They had seen what Deathworlders could do. Now they would fight with them. The human leader gave no long speech. He simply raised his hand and said one word: hold. Deathworlders crouched, their eyes locked on the enemy. Some reloaded massive weapons that had no name in the common tongue. Others bared arms covered in scars and metal implants. Their hearts beat slower than normal soldiers. They had trained their bodies to respond to death calmly. Like a routine, like breathing, the swarm came fast. Too fast for many to react, but the Deathworlders were already moving. The first line absorbed the impact like a stone wall. A tall human with a blade fused to his arm spun into the front ranks of the swarm, carving a circle with deadly speed. His armor sparked as acid splashed across it, but he did not fall. Next to him, an alien soldier screamed as a Dravak jumped at him until a Deathworlder tackled the beast mid-air and crushed its head with his bare hands. Harvin fired from the upper ridge, shouting into the comms for the flanks to close. Don't let them break through. Stay with the Deathworlders. The sky turned red as more drop pods arrived. Deathworlders leapt from them mid-fall, landing in the swarm with shockwaves that threw bodies into the air. They didn't fight for glory. They didn't shout battle cries. They just moved forward, step by step, cutting the swarm down. One Deathworlder, an older man with deep scars and a mechanical jaw, noticed the left flank beginning to bend. A dozen young alien soldiers were panicking, breaking formation. He ran toward them, faster than seemed possible for his size. Stand your ground, he barked. A young Gorlani soldier, barely of age, trembled as a Dravak lunged at him. The old human shoved him aside, taking the hit. The creature's claws ripped through his side, but he didn't scream. He locked arms with the beast and detonated. A core charged from his chest. The explosion tore a hole in the swarm. The human's body was gone. But so were 20 enemies. The Gorlani soldier stared in silence. The man had saved his life without hesitation. He gritted his teeth, turned back to the line, and began firing with new fury. Harvin saw it happen from the command ridge. He sacrificed himself, he said quietly. The human leader responded, his voice low. That's what we do. We're not here to survive. We're here to make sure others do. As the swarm began to thin, the remaining Deathworlders pushed forward. A pair of twin humans, both fused with armored wings, launched into the air, dropping firebombs across the rear of the swarm. Another Deathworlder rolled beneath enemy legs, leaving mines that tore them apart in a chain of eruptions. Within the chaos, a signal burst through the comms. An enemy command node had been found. A hive queen, hidden deep in the hills. The swarm wasn't just attacking at random, it was being directed. Controlled, we take her out, we stop the wave. One of the soldiers shouted, but it wasn't that simple. The queen was protected by hundreds of armored guards. The path to her was narrow, deadly, and exposed. I'll go, said a female Deathworlder. Her armor was different, old, blackened from previous wars. Her voice was steady. I can reach her. The human leader stepped toward her. Tess, if you go in alone, you won't come back. I know, she replied. But you will. That's what matters. Without waiting, she sprinted toward the hill. Enemy fire rained down on her, but she moved like smoke. Fast, silent, deadly. Her body was already damaged, but she never slowed. Her blades danced through the swarm. Blood and sparks followed every move. At the top of the ridge, she faced the queen. For a brief moment, the battlefield went still. Then came a flash-blinding white light from her weapon's core, exploding into the queen's chest. The roar that followed was not pain, it was collapse. The hive mind shattered. The swarm faltered. Hundreds of Dravak collapsed mid-run. Others screamed and turned on each other. Confused, leaderless. Harvin looked around and realized it was ending. The battlefield was quiet now. No more screaming, no more tremors. Only smoke, ash, and the smell of burned alien flesh remained. The swarm was broken. The Dravak forces, once endless and unstoppable, now lay scattered in lifeless piles across the cratered earth. General Harvin walked across the field slowly, stepping over twisted limbs and cracked armor. His weapon hung low at his side. His eyes were not looking for enemies anymore. They searched for the fallen, the ones who had stood their ground when all hope seemed lost. Especially the ones who had come from Earth. The Deathworlders were gathering their wounded. Some still stood watch, weapons raised, in case the swarm's death wasn't complete. Others moved silently through the field, lifting their own from the rubble. They didn't cry. They didn't speak much. But the grief was there, in every breath, in every heavy step. Tess's remains had not been recovered. Only the burn mark on the hill where she had faced the queen remained. Her sacrifice had shattered the hive's control. Without her, the swarm would have torn them all apart. Harvin found the human leader standing alone near a broken piece of the Titan's metal. His coat was torn. One eye was swollen. Blood ran down the side of his face. But he stood straight, calm, cold. She knew what it would cost. Harvin said, "She chose it," the human replied. There was silence between them for a long moment. Then Harvin spoke again. "We owe her our lives. We owe all of you." The human looked at him, eyes glowing faintly gold. "What will you do with that debt?" Harvin didn't answer right away. The stars above had started to return, visible now that the smoke had thinned. He stared upward and let out a breath. "The High Council will want to bury this. They'll want to hide that you were here." The human nodded. "They always do, but I won't let them," Harvin said, firm now. "I saw what your people did. I saw how you fought. How you gave everything without asking for anything in return. I'll tell the truth. The humans studied him. You'll be alone. Harvin smiled faintly. That's what friends are for, the two men. Shook hands, not with ceremony. Not with fanfare. Just quiet understanding between two warriors who had seen the edge of death and walked back from it together. The following days were a blur of rebuilding. The allied soldiers, inspired by what they had seen, began to spread the word. Stories of the Deathworlders reached distant outposts. Some believed. Some doubted. But the whispers had begun. They came from Earth. They stopped the unstoppable. They never ran. In a quiet valley near the battlefield, the Deathworlders built a small structure. Not a base, not a fortress, a stone monument. It bore no flag, no empire's mark, only names. Names of the ones who had fallen. Human and alien alike. At the center, a single plate was engraved with the words, "She chose to stand. So we could rise." Teshervan stood before it dazed. Later, placing his hand gently on the cold metal. Behind him, young soldiers filed past, some in silence, some whispering stories of what they'd seen. The monument was more than a grave. It was a warning and a promise. The human leader, preparing his team to leave, walked up beside Harvan. "One last time, you could stay," Harvan offered. "The galaxy is changing. You could be part of it again." The human shook his head. "We never stopped being part of it. The galaxy just tried to forget us. So what now?" Harvan asked. The human stared off into the horizon, where distant stars blinked faintly in the sky. "Now we prepare for what's next. Because the swarm was only one piece of the storm coming. And when the next threat rises, you'll be there," Harvan finished. The human finally smiled, just a little. Deathworlders always show up when it matters most. Especially when they're not wanted. He turned and walked toward the dropship. The other Deathworlders followed, silent shadows boarding the vessel one by one. As the engines roared too. Life, Harvan raised his hand not in salute, but in respect. The ship lifted into the sky and vanished into clouds. The war was over. But something greater had begun. A galaxy that once feared the Deathworlders had now seen their truth. They were not monsters. They were not myths. They were warriors born of pain who chose to protect rather than destroy. And now, their legend had returned.